Hey friends, my name is Bailey. Welcome to my channel. Today we are talking about folk horror and especially Midsommar. So if you liked Midsommar, the A24 film, please stick around. I am showing you movies and books in the folk horror realm that also have certain similar themes and feels to Midsommar in this video. The next video is going to be about The Witch, the other A24 film. And then I might do a third video, depending on how it goes. So if something didn't pop up in this video or was recommended in this video, please don't worry, it's coming, I promise. I've been researching folk horror for a year and a half now. I'm definitely an enthusiast of folk horror, even though I don't like horror itself. I am a folk herbalist and animist, and so a lot of what I believe in is used to scare people in these movies and books, which is quite fun. But also the difference of folk horror with horror is that, by the way, folk horror is a genre of horror, is that there's a really long buildup. There's usually a really long buildup to the actual horrible event. Whereas when you're reading horror, take Stephen King's Salem's Lot, for example, it's like right away in your face. You know it's horror, you know it's gonna be scary, there's jump scares, what have you. Not so much in folk horror. And that's why it's like more accessible for me, because I'm a wuss. I'm totally a chicken shit. I guess we should talk about what folk horror is before really getting involved in this. There's a website called folkhorrorrevival.com where they really go in depth into what folk horror is. There's an article by Andy Patrick in which Andy has a commentary on an article that came out in 2014 by Adam Scoville, who is a writer, filmmaker, and creator of the Celluloid Wickerman blog. And Adam put forward a chain of elements that comprise a folk horror film. This includes 1, landscape. Folk horror movies are all about the landscape, right? 2, isolation. So usually it's city people going to the country and being isolated. 3, skewed moral beliefs. Now, I have some stuff to say about that here in a second. And then 4, a happening or a summoning. So some type of like big ritual that's based off of the skewed moral beliefs. When I said I have something to say here, it's not always necessarily isolation. There is now a genre of folk horror called urban wild, or urban weird, I'm sorry, WYRD. So folk horror, like the Candyman, is a really great example of urban weird. I don't think I can touch urban weird with a 10-foot pole. There's something about the countryside that like eases me a little bit more. That's so weird. So where was folk horror first mentioned? It was first mentioned in an English journal in 1936 by Oscar James Campbell, who was an American Shakespearean scholar, weirdly enough, and he was describing the horror in ancient Germanic beliefs. So he coined the term folk horror. He was talking about traditional beliefs in the landscape. Also, usually there's an element of the establishment gone wrong. And so that's where like the skewed moral beliefs comes in. It's like the leader of this town in the middle of nowhere usually has some type of weird belief system. And so who can you trust if you can't trust the police or the leader or whomever? And then there's also this uptick in folk horror in the 60s and 70s when it was, you know, hippies were going back to the land. So they were coming from the city and they were going back to the land. And that is seen again in the early 2000s, and I would even venture to say right now. And it's usually because of economics and this like idea of a utopia, this idea of getting back to the land. But there's always some type of tension between the city dweller and the country person because of different beliefs. The city person is usually seen as like progressive, and the country person is usually seen as stuck in old, weird, WYRD ways. There's also an element, and this is on me, this is one of the things that I've been researching. There's also this element of psychic geography or psychogeography. It's not necessarily just about location, but the land has its own energy that then becomes sort of like an emotional vortex. Sometimes in these movies or these books, that ends up entrapping the main characters, like they can't leave that land, or that land, you'll see like a lot of them say it's an ancient burial ground, or there were a lot of sacrifices done on that land. So that land then becomes powerful in the uprising of pagan. I keep doing air quotes because these are really complex. These are super complex ideas, and you know, even just diving into what is pagan is a whole other debacle we won't get into today. Now, what I also found interesting that other people didn't mention, it was mentioned in a documentary I'll talk about, but there's this idea of nationalism as well. So the idea of the outsiders versus the people that were originally there or are on their ancestors' land. This extends to literally every country. Folk horror is in every country. So, well, not every country, but it's every continent. Not every continent. All over the world. I'm nerding out, and that's when I start stumbling. So that's why I have notes. I split this video into, the first part is going to be about movies. We have a ton of resources on folk horror movies. So then the second part is going to be about folk horror books, because originally I am a booktuber and I want to talk about the books. And we are really, really lacking on YouTube for that. So this video is about, if you liked Midsommar, the A24 film, then you will like these other movies and books. The way that I organized this was based on themes, plural, and mood and tone. So in Midsommar, we see a woman who is grieving, and she's not supported by the people closest to her. She has no community. And then she finds this community who is all about the collective grief that is, you know, her life, and that is living. You have that theme. You have a theme of a cult. So it is a small cult 4 hours away from a major city. So you have the isolation theme. You also have the pagan theme, like the Green Man paganism type theme, I should say, because the next video I'm doing also has pagan themes, but this is more of like nature-based paganism, if that makes sense. And then the psychedelics that are used throughout this movie also connect the city dwellers to the psychogeography. So they kind of don't know what's going on. They're starting to feel entrapped and starting to blend in with nature, which is actually extremely visible when you see the main character's hands become roots, and her flower crown starts breathing along with her. You also have the obnoxious city dwellers who are not okay with the customs of the small cult. Okay? So those are the themes that I looked for in other things. Let's go ahead and start. If you liked Midsommar, you have to watch The Wickerman. It's a 1973 film. There was also another film, I believe, done in the 90s. I'm recommending the 1973 film. The director is Robin Hardy, and it stars Edward Woodward, Christopher Lee, and Diane Salento. And it says a Puritan police sergeant arrives in a Scottish island village in search of a missing girl who the pagan locals claim never existed. So we have, when they say Puritan police sergeant, we're talking like he is Christian through and through. He wants to figure out where this little girl, why is she missing? I'm gonna go help her. He's like trying to be altruistic, and then he befriends the like mayor of this town, and a lot of things start just kind of going awry. There's like weird festivals. He realizes that he arrived right before their biggest festival. We already have the theme of like obnoxious city dweller who is not okay with the customs of the small town. We have Green Man cult influences. I mean, it's the Wicker Man. So everyone's dressed in white, just like Midsommar. And we have this like historical time period in which it's like fuzzy. So the Romans reported that the British pagans would burn, like sacrifice people inside a large wicker man. Of course, we cannot trust the Romans with everything because they didn't like the Brits. It's always, the people that conquer write history. So we have no idea if this actually happened. However, Robert Graves wrote a book in, when was it? The 60s? Don't quote me on this. It's called The White Goddess, where he basically reinstates that yes, there were all of these, ceremonies and festivals. I should say I'm getting most of my information about the history of these movies from a documentary. I failed to tell you. From a documentary called Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched. It's 3 hours and it's all about folk horror. So it dives into what folk horror is, and then also the history behind all of these different themes, except for the ones that I have added. Check it out. The next movie is The Blood on Satan's Claw. This was released in 1971. The director is Piers Haggard, and it stars Patrick Wymark, Linda Hayden, and Barry Andrews. It says in early 18th century England, the children of a village slowly convert into a coven of devil worshippers. This is very much themed in like cult lore, American cults, and very much about feminine sexuality and the kind of like sin a sexual woman can bring into a community. It does have city dwellers. It does have this cult type theme. All of the kids start wearing white, like in Midsommar, and it's a classic. So put it on the list. The next movie is The Witchfinder General. Now this is like the classic of the classics. This was released in 1968. Its director is Michael Reeves, and it stars Vincent Price, Ian Ogilvy, and Rupert Davies. During the English Civil War, a young Roundhead seeks vengeance against a vicious witch hunter and his henchmen who have terrorized the soldier's fiancée and wrongly executed her uncle. So once again, we're talking about morality, morals gone bad, an establishment that you can no longer trust, a small village, people fighting amongst each other in a small village, and these pagan ways, right? This witchfinder is like going after what he believes are witches. So you have rituals as well within Witchfinder General. Now, I had a hard time figuring out where this next movie belonged. And I would say it still belongs in this Midsommar category. And that's because it's still kind of summery. It doesn't have the dark tones that are fall and Halloweenish. It involves isolation and obnoxious city people. And even though it's set in America and it's not British and there aren't like pagan rites, there are weird rituals that aren't understood. And that's Deliverance. I am going out on my kayak this weekend, and I hope to erase Deliverance from my brain while I do that. This is a 1972 film with the director of John Boorman. It stars Jon Voight, Burt Reynolds, and Ned Beatty. Intent on seeing the Kahoolaawasi River before it's dammed and turned into a lake, outdoor fanatic Lewis Medlock takes his friends on a canoeing trip they'll never forget into the dangerous American backcountry. If you are afraid of Appalachia, if you are afraid of banjo players, if you are afraid of communities who have inbreeding issues, don't watch this. Please, I am not a trigger warning person, but I am for this one. This is very extreme. This is not as like silly or light as the other movies that I've mentioned. It's very extreme. So just take that for what you will. I'm so happy to move on. This is actually a TV show that I want to talk about. It used to be a movie. I mean, it still is a movie, but this is a recent TV show, and it's called Picnic at Hanging Rock. It came out in 2018. It's called a psychological thriller, but I would definitely call it folk horror. It's starring Natalie Dormer, Lily Sullivan, and Lola Bessis. It says 3 schoolgirls and their governesses mysteriously disappear on Valentine's Day in 1900. That's like, there's no synopsis at all. Hanging Rock is, I believe, in Australia. And it's this like place you're not supposed to go to at all. And these 3 girls were like going through different timelines. These 3 girls and their headmistresses, they do disappear near Hanging Rock during a picnic. There's like some magical realism that's happening. It's kind of like the psychedelics at Midsommar, where time kind of slows and stops, and they drink like this tea and they become one with the nature. And there's some sapphic romance involved. It's very interesting. I was like on the edge of my seat the whole time. I will say, if you want a clean ending, you're not gonna get it. You're not gonna get the like bow tie, but that's one of the cool things about folk horror, is that there's rarely that happy, clean ending. We don't know if the girls ran away. We don't know if they were killed. And so you're just really following their storylines, and you're also hearing about their drama from other schoolgirls and their romances and their dreams. And it's really beautifully done as well. Also, Natalie Dormer, come on. Amazing. She's the headmistress of this like whole school. Finally, also kind of weird to put this in this category, but it'll make sense at some point, is The Changeling, which is a TV series from 2023 that I had never heard of, that a lot of other people have. I just finished it, and it stars Lakeith Stanfield, love him, Victor LaValle, and Clark Bacco. It's set in an alternate New York City. A father and husband searches through a magical world for his abducted son and missing wife. From the title of The Changeling, hopefully you can see that it's more about fae. There's this magical realism with fae and witchcraft, and also these magical places within New York that nobody really knows about, and they kind of belong in different dimensions almost. So you do get to like leave New York City. You do get to go into like isolation, like you get to go to this island. Well, you don't, but Keith does. Although it's not described as folk horror, it's described as drama and fantasy and a thriller. I would definitely put it in the folk horror genre because it has to do with, well, the themes I just described. Also a grieving mother who isn't being believed and she doesn't have a community. You also have the theme of like these pagan ways. We don't know if there's paganism. We don't know really like what kind of spellcraft is going on. And because I put it in the theme of like with Midsommar, is that there is kind of a cult involved as well. There's a couple cults involved. So watch Changeling if you are scared of folk horror and you need like an entry point. This one's just amazing, and I haven't looked to see if there's a second season. If there is, let me know down below, but I loved it. I was obsessed with it. So those are the movies. If you liked Midsommar, I'll go back over them. The Wickerman, Blood on Satan's Claw, Witchfinder General, Deliverance, Picnic at Hanging Rock, and The Changeling. And so now we're gonna move into books that you might like if you like Midsommar. The first book that I am gonna recommend if you like Midsommar is Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. This was first published in 2018. It says, in the north of England, far from the intrusions of cities, but not far from civilization, Sylvie and her family are living as if they are ancient Britons, surviving by the tools and knowledge of the Iron Age. For 2 weeks, the length of her father's vacation, they join an anthropology course set to reenact life in simpler times. They are surrounded by forests of birch and rowan. They make stew from foraged roots and hunted rabbit. The students are fulfilling their coursework. Sylvie's father is fulfilling his lifelong obsession. He has raised her on stories of early man, taken her to witness rare artifacts, recounted time and again their rituals and beliefs, particularly their sacrifices to the bog. Mixing with the students, Sylvie begins to see, hear, and imagine another kind of life, one that might include going to university, traveling beyond England, choosing her own clothes and food, speaking her mind. The ancient Britons built ghost walls to ward off enemy invaders, rude barricades of stake topped with ancestral skulls. When the group builds one of their own, they find a spiritual connection to the past. What comes next but human sacrifice? A story at once mythic and strikingly timely. The Ghost Wall urges us to wonder how far we have come from the primitive minds of our ancestors. For very obvious reasons, that is thrown in here. Another book would be Lost in the Garden by Adam S. Leslie. This just came out this year, May of 2024. Heather, Rachel, and Antonia are going to Almonby. Heather needs to find her boyfriend, who, like so many, went and never came back. Rachel has a mysterious package to deliver, and her life depends on it. And Antonia, poor, love-struck Antonia, just wants the chance to spend the day with Heather. So off they set through the idyllic yet perilous English countryside in which nature thrives in abundance and summer lasts forever. And as they travel through ever-shifting geography and encounter strange voices in the fizz of shortwave radio, the harder it becomes to tell friend from foe. Creepy, dreamlike, unsettling, and unforgettable, you are about to join the privileged few who have come to understand exactly why we don't go to Almonby. P.S. I'm reading that right now. Stay tuned for my TBR. Another book, this is a classic, so very, very much like The Wicker Man is a classic to folk horror. Harvest Home is a classic to folk horror books. Harvest Home is by Thomas Tryon. It was first published in 1973. It says, it was almost as if time had not touched the village of Cornwall Coombe. The quiet, peaceful place was straight out of bygone era, with well-cared-for colonial houses, a white steepled church fronting a broad common. Ned and Beth Constantine chanced upon the hamlet and immediately fell in love with it. That was exactly the haven they dreamt of, or so they thought. For Ned and his family, Cornwall Coombe was to become a place of ultimate horror. Spoiler alert, I read a little bit of that last year, and I will say it's a very slow build. So this is like one of those good ones if you don't like straight up horror. Like if Stephen King is really hard for you, I would go for Harvest Home. The next book is impossible to find, but I guess it's on Audible. It's out of print. I have contacted 2 shops in England for this book. I don't understand why it's out of print. It has a pretty high rating on Goodreads. Anyways, it's Water Shall Refuse Them by Lucy McKnight Hardy. This was first published in 2019. And it says, the heat wave of 1976, following the accidental drowning of her sister, 16-year-old Nif, and her family moved to a small village on the Welsh borders to escape their grief. But rural seclusion doesn't bring any relief. As her family unravels, Nif begins to put together her own form of witchcraft, collecting talismans from the sun-starved land. That is, until she meets Mally, a teen boy who takes a keen interest in her and has his own secret rites to divulge. Reminiscent of the suspense of Shirley Jackson and soaked in the folk horror of the British landscape, Water Shall Refuse Them is an atmospheric coming-of-age novel and a thrilling debut. I really, really, really cannot wait to read that one. Again, check my folk horror TBR. I'm kind of spoiling it right now. Finally, now this might not be seen as folk horror, just like Changeling, the TV series, might not be seen as folk horror, but hear me out. So this is called Wilding Hall by Elizabeth Hand. It was first published in 2015. It's described as gothic. There is an overlap sometimes, but I would still consider this folk horror, and that's because of the isolation piece and the psychogeography or psychic geography, as well as the deep folklore of the town. So, when the young members of a British acid folk band are compelled by their manager to record their unique music, they hole up at Wilding Hall, an ancient country house with dark secrets. There they create the album that will make their reputation, but at a terrifying cost. Julian Blake, the group's lead singer, disappears within the mansion and is never seen or heard from again. Now, years later, the surviving musicians, along with their friends and lovers, including a psychic, a photographer, and the band's manager, meet with a young documentary filmmaker to tell their own versions of what happened that summer. But whose story is true, and what really happened to Julian Blake? This is like set up like Daisy Jones and the Six. All of these people are being interviewed for this documentary. So if you liked that format, I would definitely recommend listening to the audiobook of Wilding Hall. It's like 5 hours long. It's a pretty short, I would consider it a novella. But there's a big element of the town's folklore in this disappearance, and also fae. So that's why I included it as well into the Midsommar category. So hopefully I've made my case. If you like Midsommar, watch some of these movies, pick up some of these books. The next installment that I'll be doing is based on A24's The Witch, which is also folk horror. And so if you didn't hear about a book or movie that you thought should be in this YouTube video, wait for that one. I also have a folk horror TBR coming up and a folk horror vlog. The vlog is going on my Patreon, along with other immersive content about folk horror. So if you want to be part of that community, the link should be below. Otherwise, yeah, I'm glad that you guys were here, and I hope that you take these recommendations. I have seen all of these movies and I've read all of these books, and I can definitely say they fit within this genre. So hopefully you will choose your own adventure. All right. See you soon, y'all. Bye.